Here's a sequence of events that nobody has explained clearly. On Saturday, June 20th, Iran declared the Strait of Hormuz closed again, the waterway that the entire ceasefire was built around, the one that took months to reopen, the one that has been pushing your gas bill higher since February, closed. Iran's military warned ships to stay away. The IRGC said it was because the US had failed to rein in Israel in Lebanon. On Sunday, J.D. Vance sat down in Switzerland with Iranian officials and told reporters that great progress was being made. Both things are true simultaneously, and the gap between them is the story most coverage this week got wrong. I don't work for a bank, a government, or a news network. I've spent 7 years watching where the global order breaks, the fractures that form years before anyone calls them a crisis. Judge this by whether the analysis holds up. If you've been following Fracture Point's coverage of this conflict, the Iran deal that was called largely negotiated, the MOU that deferred the nuclear question, the China leverage inside the Hormuz crisis, today's video is where all of those threads land. Because what happened in Switzerland this weekend wasn't a step toward resolution. It was the first real test of whether any of this holds together, and the test did not go smoothly. Let's go through exactly what happened because the details matter. The MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding, signed between the US and Iran in mid-June, had 3 core commitments: a ceasefire on all fronts, including Lebanon, the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz without Iranian tolls for a minimum of 60 days, and the launch of negotiations on Iran's nuclear program. That third commitment was the one everyone knew was hardest. The first 2 were supposed to be the easy part, the foundation on which the harder conversation could be built. Iran closed Hormuz before the nuclear talks even started. Its justification was specific. The MOU required all military action in Lebanon to stop. Israel continued striking Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon throughout the weekend. Iran said the US, by failing to stop Israel, had breached its commitments. The MOU is therefore jeopardized, Iran's foreign ministry said. The IRGC's navy warned vessels to stay away from the strait. The US disputed the closure entirely. Central Command stated that Iran does not control the Strait of Hormuz and that traffic was continuing to flow. Vance said that 16 million barrels of oil had moved through the strait in the 24 hours before the announcement, a record, he said, going back to before the war. So the US position was, the strait is open regardless of what Iran announces. That dispute, Iran saying closed, America saying open, is not a minor procedural disagreement. It goes to the heart of the entire negotiating framework. The MOU was premised on the assumption that both sides had the ability and the willingness to deliver on their commitments. Iran is saying the US can't deliver on Israel. The US is saying Iran can't close what it claims to have closed. If neither party can meet its own commitments on the easy things, what does that say about the probability of reaching agreement on the hardest thing they've ever attempted to negotiate, Iran's nuclear program? And then, at roughly the same time, Trump got on the phone with Fox News. While Vance was sitting in a Swiss hotel across from Iranian negotiators, Trump told the network that if Iran closes the strait, the US will, in his words, blow the hell out of them. He said Iran won't even make it back to their country. He said the MOU is just an option and he can do whatever he wants. He suggested the US might start charging its own tolls on Hormuz if a final deal isn't reached in 60 days, for what he called services rendered as the guardian angel of the Middle East. Iran's chief negotiator, Mohammad Bagher Khalibaf, posted a response to X describing what he called American desperation. Iran told the mediators, Pakistan and Qatar, that it would not continue in the 4-party format under these conditions. The talks stalled, and then, somehow, they continued. Pakistan and Qatar spent hours working to keep both delegations at the table. A senior US diplomat confirmed that negotiators worked through the night. By Monday morning, a joint statement from the mediating countries described the session as positive and constructive, A roadmap for a final deal within 60 days had been agreed. Iran consented to invite IAEA inspectors back into the country, which Vance described as a major milestone and the first step toward permanently ending Iran's nuclear weapons program. So what actually happened? Was this a crisis that was contained, or a preview of what the next 60 days look like? Honest answer, both. And understanding why requires separating what each side actually needs from what each side publicly said. Iran's Hormuz closure was almost certainly a negotiating move, not a genuine attempt to blow up the talks. If Tehran wanted the talks dead, its delegation wouldn't have stayed in Switzerland through Saturday night and into Sunday. What Iran was doing was establishing publicly, in a way that would land on American television, that it still holds the strait as a lever, that the MOU has not stripped it of that capability, and that any agreement that disadvantages Iran has a built-in mechanism for reversal. It was reminding Washington of its position before the nuclear conversation started. Trump's Fox News call served a parallel purpose domestically. With an American public that has been paying the highest gas prices in years and watching military action in the Middle East for nearly 4 months, Trump needed to signal strength even as his vice president was sitting in Switzerland asking Iran for a deal. The threats were for American consumption. The talks were for everyone else. This is a pattern that shows up repeatedly in how this administration has conducted diplomacy throughout this conflict. Public maximalism alongside private negotiation. It worked to a degree in the original MOU. The question is whether it remains workable when the subject shifts from ceasefire terms to nuclear ones, because the nuclear question is categorically harder, and what emerged from Switzerland doesn't make it easier. Iran's president stated publicly, on the same day talks were underway, that Iran will never back down from its right to enrich uranium. That is not a negotiating position. That is a statement of principle. The question of uranium enrichment, whether Iran can continue enriching, at what level, under what verification regime, is the core of every Iran nuclear negotiation that has ever been attempted. The 2015 JCPOA allowed limited enrichment. Trump withdrew from that deal. Iran then escalated enrichment to 60%, a step away from weapons grade. The IAEA inspectors returning is genuinely significant. It restores some visibility into what Iran is doing, but inspectors can only verify what's happening. They cannot by themselves resolve the question of what Iran is allowed to do. The 60-day technical talks that begin this week have to answer the question that has defeated every previous negotiating effort. At what level and under what conditions does Iran's enrichment program continue? Iran enters those talks having just demonstrated again that it can reach for the Hormuz lever whenever it chooses. The US enters those talks with its president making live threats on cable news while the vice president negotiates. Both sides brought contradictions to Switzerland, and yet, despite all of it, a roadmap exists. Inspectors are returning. Technical talks are underway. For anyone drawing down retirement savings or living on a fixed income, here is where this lands directly. Gas prices fell approximately 14% in the month following the MOU. An average gallon of gas was still running nearly $1 above pre-war levels as of Sunday. Every day the Strait question remains unresolved is a day that dollar gap stays in place. If the 60-day nuclear talks succeed and Hormuz is genuinely secured, analysts have projected oil could flood markets, which means pump prices fall further. If the talks collapse and military action resumes, the opposite happens, and the energy costs that have been compressing retirement purchasing power since February get worse again. The Switzerland talks were supposed to be the beginning of the resolution. They turned out to be a compressed preview of every tension that made the original conflict so difficult to end. Iran's leverage hasn't disappeared. America's domestic political pressures haven't quieted. Israel and Lebanon are still exchanging fire. And the 60 days everyone is counting on started with a closure, a threat, a stall, and a roadmap, in roughly that order. Whether that roadmap leads somewhere real is the only question that matters now. And the honest answer, based on what Switzerland produced, is that nobody knows yet. What we do know is that this week established the negotiating dynamic that will govern the next 60 days. Iran will use Hormuz as a pressure valve. America will alternate between threats and concessions. Pakistan and Qatar will work overnight to keep both delegations at the table. And at the end of it, either the nuclear question gets resolved or it doesn't. And whichever way it goes, it lands on your energy bill before it lands in the history books. This is James Whitmore. The 60-day clock is running. I'll be back when it moves. If you want to be there when it does, the channel is free and subscribing takes 2 seconds.